Preliminary peace talks begin between Britain and the United States. Picture this, it's April 1782, and two groups of tired, broke, and utterly over it people are sitting down in Paris to do what they've avoided for years. Actually talk. On one side, the British, fresh from realizing that maybe they shouldn't have treated the colonies like annoying younger siblings. On the other, the Americans, who are still deciding if they're an underdog success story or just got lucky with French credit cards and Spanish snacks. What follows is diplomacy at its messiest, complete with egos, grudges, and just enough passive aggression to make it entertaining. The American Revolution was winding down, but not without leaving a trail of chaos. The Brits had suffered humiliating defeats. Remember Yorktown? Yeah, that stung. Their treasury was emptier than a frat house fridge, and their colonies were behaving like rebellious teenagers who just got their first taste of freedom. Meanwhile, the Americans weren't exactly popping champagne. Their economy was in tatters, their soldiers were mutinying over unpaid wages, and their alliances with France and Spain were starting to feel like awkward prom dates who stuck around too long. Enter Paris, the city of lights, love, and apparently peace treaties. Benjamin Franklin, that genius/flirt, was already there, charming everyone in powdered wigs. Joining him were John Adams, known for his intense "I am always right" energy, and John Jay, who had the patience of a saint and the skepticism of a mom hearing a teenager say, "I'll be home by 9." Representing Britain were diplomats like Richard Oswald, a guy who looked like he was born in a powdered wig, and a few others who had the unenviable job of telling the king, "So, we might need to let this whole America thing go." The Brits weren't thrilled about negotiating, but they had bigger problems, like France threatening to knock on their door with more ships. Franklin was basically the cool grandpa of the group, winning over the French with his charm while secretly keeping a tally of how much they owed. Adams? He was the guy who showed up with spreadsheets and receipts, ready to argue over every inch of territory. And Jay? He was the quiet one in the back, but don't let that fool you. He was the one who convinced everyone that Spain might not have America's best interests at heart. The talks began awkwardly, as most family interventions do. The Americans wanted independence, and they wanted it yesterday. The Brits, on the other hand, were hoping for some kind of face-saving compromise. Like maybe letting the colonies have independence light while still keeping the Union Jack on their merch. Spoiler, the Americans were not about that life. Here's where it gets hilarious. At one point, Franklin floated the idea that maybe, just maybe, the British could compensate America for all the damage done during the war. Imagine the Brits' faces. They were already broke, and now Grandpa Franklin was suggesting they whip out their wallets? It was like asking someone who just totaled your car to pay for your new rims. Meanwhile, Adams was laser focused on securing fishing rights off Newfoundland, because apparently freedom wasn't enough. America also needed fish. Lots of fish. The Brits were baffled, probably thinking, sure, take the fish, but what's with the obsession? And then there was Jay, who played 4D chess while everyone else was stuck on checkers. He realized that Spain and France might use the talks to carve up America like a Thanksgiving turkey. So he insisted on dealing directly with Britain. This move annoyed the French, but Jay knew the golden rule of diplomacy: trust no one, especially when they're smiling too much. The talks weren't all serious. For one, the Americans and Brits had wildly different ideas of what negotiation meant. Franklin would charm the Brits over wine and witty banter, only to turn around and insist on outrageous demands. Adams, meanwhile, had zero chill. One British diplomat later described him as too principled, which is a polite way of saying, this guy's exhausting. Then there was the language barrier. The French were supposed to be the middlemen, but half the time, they were just translating insults and trying not to laugh. At one point, Franklin convinced a British diplomat to wear a coonskin cap to understand American culture better. The guy actually did it, and Franklin probably laughed about it for weeks. After weeks of haggling, head-butting, and probably a few bottles of brandy, the preliminary agreements were drafted. The Brits agreed to recognize American independence, and the Americans got their coveted fishing rights. It wasn't a perfect deal, but it was enough to stop the bleeding and get everyone out of Paris before things got messier. But the real kicker, the British still believed they could salvage some kind of relationship with their former colonies. Little did they know, America was already planning its glow-up as the rebellious ex who doesn't text back. The preliminary peace talks didn't end the war officially. That came later with the Treaty of Paris in 1783, but they were the beginning of the end. America was now on the path to full independence, and Britain was left to lick its wounds and focus on its other colonies. The talks also set the stage for modern diplomacy, proving that even the messiest breakups can be settled if both sides are willing to sit down, talk, and occasionally wear a ridiculous hat. This moment wasn't just about two nations hashing things out, it was about the birth of a new world order. The United States would go on to become a global power, and Britain would adapt, finding new ways to stay relevant without its rebellious teenage colonies. But perhaps the greatest lesson of all, never underestimate the power of a good negotiator. A clever strategy and the sheer audacity to demand fishing rights while the world is burning. So what's the takeaway here? Diplomacy is weird. History is messier than a college dorm room, and Benjamin Franklin probably had the time of his life trolling the British. The preliminary peace talks of April 1782 weren't perfect, but they were a masterclass in how to win an argument without flipping the table, most of the time. Anyway,